Hi guys, so another little update, a little bit more on some insurance questions because I was chatting with a friend of mine and she had even more questions about insurance from what I shared with you last time. So I've included in this video a bit of what she and I chatted about, which I thought was also really helpful, but just to give a little summary of what she and I were talking about, because I think it can be really helpful just to have an idea of some of the things to be working through. So in my video about whether to stay with your studio, I highlighted that insurance is one of the questions you need to raise, which would be contacting your insurer and saying to them, am I covered for teaching online classes? And specifically checking the following three things, which is, are you covered for virtual live online classes? Are you covered to teach an on-demand video? And whether or not there are restrictions as to which countries you can deliver these videos into. This may arise with your insurer because some countries are more litigious than others, and so they deem it a more expensive risk profile. And that means that they might ask you to pay an extra premium for teaching those videos to people in those countries. The next thing that we're gonna talk through are health forms and some disclaimers, making sure that you get the information you need to cover your insurance about your clients, knowing their key health concerns. And just making sure that also upfront you include maybe your disclaimer and your terms of service in that, which we'll cover in a different video. The other thing to know in terms of your insurance is if you are teaching online and delivering to other countries, they may require specific terms in your terms of sale that state the country of which they can bring a claim against you if they were to injure themselves and what courts are going to govern such a claim. This would be something that then goes into your terms and conditions. So you might want to double check if there's specific wording that your insurers require for you to include when delivering online. And that's the kind of thing you're going to include with the health form up front at the beginning, even if someone's only paying a donation or receiving your class for free. The next point to just double check with your insurer is how long you're allowed to keep your client's personal data for. Most insurers will require you to keep it for approximately 6 years, depending on the statute of limitations in your applicable country of the insurer. So that can slightly vary. Just ask your insurer to let you know how long you need to keep people's personal data for to ensure your coverage is accurate. And your insurer will also have a cap on your insurance coverage and the areas in which you're covered. So just double check exactly what those numbers are and what those areas are. And that's the other kind of thing you're going to be putting into your terms of service when you are getting people to sign up to join your classes. This just means that if you are sued, your insurer covers all your costs and there's nothing that's going to start to take away your car or your home if a court case were to ensue and take even more money from you than what your insurers cover. Then my friend and I are going to cover off a couple of other key points related to insurance. One is if you're doing more than just teaching a casual yoga class, Pilates class online, that would be something like a teacher training. That will have a different level of insurance for online delivery of teacher trainings. The next point is whether or not insurance requires that you have first aid. It's a bit tricky doing first aid online. It's quite hard to apply a dressing to somebody's bleeding cut when you're over the internet. So we just run through a couple of the key things to think about in relation to first aid. And then also just being mindful about what your certification coverage is in terms of your qualifications and how you're setting that out in terms of marketing and advertising your classes to people. There are specific terms like therapy that are clearly defined in different countries and they may have different certification levels. So for example, to be a yoga therapist in America has very different training requirements than it does in the UK. As do certain energy and massage therapeutic practices have in Canada versus what there is as a requirement in Australia. So just be really mindful that if you're starting to target a larger audience around the world, they may have a different expectation of what those words mean, and you may be called to account in another country in terms of their regulation if you're not mindful and careful about the terminology you're using in selling your classes. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Adele, and let me know if you've got any more questions. More videos are up and coming. It does take me a little while to put them together, but I really appreciate your patience and your support. Thanks, guys. So we've had a bit of time to think about if this is really what you want to do, and you've had a bit of a look at some of the models and thinking about where your energy and boundaries are best suited in terms of your options, because there's so many out there, but also keeping it simple, so you're starting with something that's the least amount for you to learn in terms of all of these new skills, platforms and everything. So now what we need to do is look at what you've come up with, and is it viable for you to kind of get going with the least amount of upfront cost and time and energy, so that you can start making some money, and then maybe invest that into building your next amazing website and platform that you were talking about in our last session. So my first question, and I've covered this in another video for joining studios, but I think it's relevant to remember and remind everyone about this one now, is about insurance. So insurers have different policies, they cover for you for different things, and your insurer may be different from someone else's, so make no assumptions. Phone your insurer and double check that you're okay to teach virtual online classes, whether they're live but also downloadable. Some insurers may put two types of restrictions on what you're able to get coverage for. The first one may be teacher training. A lot of the time, if you're offering some kind of teacher training online, they will have a different premium than what you can do just for teaching a class. So that's the first thing to check. Now, obviously, if you're a teacher trainer of some method, then you probably already know that you have to have different insurance, and that you would want to be double checking that as a part of this process. The other one is that often insurers have at least some degree of geographic restriction about where you can practice. So say when I worked in the UK, it covered all of Europe, but then they did start to get funny about me doing work in different countries and what the terms were of me teaching abroad. And when I moved to Australia, I discovered that the insurers that I spoke to had also different rules and different approaches to my teaching online from what I'd had in the UK. What you just want to double check is, what are those geographic territories that you're insured to cover online, and what activities you're insured to cover online, whether it's a live class or pre-recorded video.
And does that depend on the platform you're using as well? So, for example, if you put it on YouTube, anyone anywhere can access it, versus if you've got it on a subscription-based Patreon or personal website, it's going to be a different access.
Yeah, and this is a problem, right? So most insurers outside of the US and Canada will have an exclusion on the US and Canada because they're such litigious countries. And so they will ask you for specific data on your client base before you can add those, and it will be an additional premium to have videos being provided to those clients or teaching those clients. Because I do have US clients, I had to put in a specific case to my insurers of my percentage of overall revenue that was in Australia, there was ex-Australia and specific to US, as well as the amount of time. So not just revenue per year, but also the time, so that they could see that the percentage of my time and revenue didn't go outside of the proportions that they were willing to insure as a risk profile.
Okay.
So, as I said, not all insurers are like that. I came across insurers that wouldn't do it at all for me, and I came across insurers that, you know, that was the process. So just have a chat with them about what your model is now that you've come up with that plan, as to what it is that they're going to cover you for. And also, you know, they may have different levels of insurance depending on your qualifications. I mean, a lot of the time they'll just cover you for whatever you're certified to do, and as long as you're not going beyond your certifications, which hopefully you're not doing, then you're covered. However, remember that, you know, Canada has a very different licensing policy for massage therapy, say, which isn't a great example for doing online work. But, you know, if you're a massage therapist in Australia, your diploma may not qualify you to do massage in Canada because they require an extra 3 years of college.
Wow. Okay.
So, those are the kind of things that you also want to double check, because it may be that the certification process for some of and actually this does apply, very relevant for yoga therapy. So yoga therapy in the US has a lot more stringent hourly rules to call yourself a yoga therapist and practice under yoga therapy, be selling yoga therapy services online than it does in the UK. I can't remember what it is for Australia. Do you know how many hours it is to certify for yoga therapy here?
I don't know how many hours, but it's quite a lot.
Yeah.
Are you talking about yoga therapist as someone who can diagnose and treat using yoga, or someone who can teach meridian-based yoga in a class situation?
Yeah, it's the yoga therapist. It's therapy. As a technical term, therapy is a lot more hours. And in the UK, say, you could be a yoga therapist with 500 hours. Okay,
so here I think it's longer, because the college that I'm currently studying with requires about 3 years of training with them.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many hours it translates to, but it's a lot.
Yeah, so that's similar to the US.
But it's 1 year the duration of the study is 1 year for yoga therapy teaching in a group setting. So yoga, meridian-based yoga in a group, like yoga class.
But so technically, you may be insured for yoga therapy within Australia, right? But to sell yoga therapy to the US market online, you may be seen as misleading the client base by calling it yoga therapy when it's not classified and insured at that level. That's not the certification process under US Yoga Alliance to be a yoga therapist. You could just be a yoga teacher.
Right.
So, these are the kind of things that suddenly pop up when you get online and you're like, oh yeah, I can do all of these wonderful things. And then you go, oh, hang on, I'm not insured, and certifications in that country are different. And, suddenly you find yourself going, oh, so I can't.
Yeah. And what about first aid? This is a question that's come up for me, because here we're required to have first aid to teach in a class, in a studio. But what about the online version of teaching? Because a lot of people are, if you're teaching and you can't even see the students, or you can't see them very well, but you can't treat them with first aid even if they have an issue.
So is it your insurance that requires the first aid, or is it the studio?
Good question. The studio certainly does, and I assume that the insurance...
In the UK, I came across this when I ran my studio. So in the UK, the studios require it, because if there's no one on site on the physical premises other than the teacher, then there's a legal requirement as an employer to have a first aider on site when there are people on the premises.
Okay.
Right. So it's to do with the premises. It's not to do with the teacher. So that in the UK, that's the technicality. As a teacher, you don't have to have insurance. You don't have to have first aid for your insurance. You can go by the oh my God, how have I just forgotten the name of the principle? The Good Samaritan principle, right? So you can help as a Good Samaritan as a teacher. Technically, your insurance would not be invalidated provided you behave like a Good Samaritan. The issue is more to do with you running a physical space, which is a legal health and safety requirement to have first aid insurance.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't know about you, but a lot of the studios that I teach at in Sydney, I'm the only person. I open the keys up, and therefore I'm insured.
Yeah, especially if it's on the weekend, there's nobody there. Yeah, absolutely. I've done that too many times. Yeah.
So I guess that is really what it comes down to. I think you can't give physical first aid online, obviously. You could potentially try and give people some things to do if you saw them hurt themselves. But I think that would really be extending to the Good Samaritan principle. Yeah. But again, that's the kind of thing to ask your insurer and just double check with them whether or not they would prefer you to have first aid even though you're teaching online.
Yeah.
Because I think as you've pointed out, it's not really, first aid is physical presence. It's a physical first aid response. It's not I can talk to you over the phone and go, oh, calm down, take a deep breath, like put your foot up, put a bandage around it. But at the end of the day,
really, you're not that helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that when I did my yoga nidra training, we talked about triggering people's deep trauma. And, that is a very different skill set than first aid. And that is more important, I would say. It's not a legal thing, but as an online teacher, the skills that you need to possess are gonna be really strong space holding with verbal skills if somebody was triggered of any kind of trauma in some way, to be able to have some way of helping. And that's where, you know, really good health forms with emergency contact numbers might be useful. You know, if you saw someone and you could phone a loved one and say to them, you know, if they're not at home while they're doing the class, saying, you know, please can you get home to them, I'm concerned about them after the class. So having that process in place of emergency contacts for someone at home if they're on their own, and you see that they might have struggled as a result or that they need help. So that would be, I would say, your closest to a first aid response are the emotional skills, but your health form, good emergency contact, and know where you file all of that stuff so that you can pull it out should you need to.
Yes.
You know, when we go online, we're no longer just teaching here in Sydney with people in Sydney. So if someone hurts themselves and sues you, you're going to court in New South Wales, right?
Okay. And if you're in America?
And the case would be under New South Wales law.
Okay.
Right? The reason why insurers don't want you to teach Americans, basically, is because if I'm teaching you and you are sat in San Francisco, right? You hurt yourself in San Francisco. You might sue me in San Francisco and say, you got to pay to come to San Francisco to fight this personal injury case. And my insurer is going to be like, I don't want to cover the cost of a lawyer in America, of you having to go over to America. Like, American courts, they award loads more than they do in Sydney. Like, that's why you've got to check with your insurance. Okay, so in those terms and conditions, we want to be saying, you know, although I'm providing online, the law that applies is in New South Wales, and if you do take me to court, it's going to only be in a court in New South Wales.
Right.
You know, and I always add in an extra bit saying, like, the service provided takes place in my X town. Like, I add that in to really, like, overdo it. So I wrote templates that obviously I use for my own businesses, and they are available for download on Gumroad as well for people to use. Not as legal advice. I'd still suggest getting legal advice, especially